My name is Matthew Johnson, and I'm turning 32 this year. I work as a mental health counselor in the psychiatric ward in a general hospital. This psychiatric ward is very popular, and every day, lots of patients come to visit. The outpatient department is always packed with appointments. Since I'm a counselor, I don't perform any medical examinations. I can't administer treatments or prescribe medications. My role is to assist doctors and patients for psychological tests based on their needs. I've been at this hospital for 2 years now, and there's been a constant cycle of new counselors joining and leaving. It's perpetually short-staffed. Of course, today the appointments are packed as well. So, Dr. William Smith, who is in charge of today's outpatients, was in a terrible mood. William and I are the same age, but our personalities are the complete opposites, according to the nurses. He takes pride in having graduated from an elite medical school and lords his education over new arrivals. In medical school, there are cliques, and there's no denying that one's alma mater is highly regarded, more so than regular colleges. Even though he's skilled, his arrogant attitude had a bad reputation from the patients. Dr. Johnson, since the appointments are packed today, please make sure to stick to the counseling schedule, says the nurse, Linda Thompson, holding the records of patients scheduled for today's counseling. She drops the documents onto my desk, emphasizing, "Please be punctual." Apparently, my counseling sessions are famous for taking a long time. I become so engrossed in dealing seriously with the patients that I forget about time. Little gestures and choices of words, psychological tests, and other aspects are crucial in understanding the inner workings of a patient's mind, so I cannot overlook even the smallest signs. Trust with the patients is also essential. Many patients who come to the clinic have emotional scars, especially teenagers brought in by their parents. Nowadays, even elementary school children come to the clinic. It's a hard world to live in, I suppose. I'm doing my best to help them as well, and that often leads me to run over time. The nurses are constantly complaining, and I truly feel bad about that, but what can I do? In this respect, William doesn't miss a beat. When he's in charge of outpatient care, his decisions are quick, and his instructions to the nurses are spot on. He's highly rated among the staff. William and I are apparently referred to as the odd couple of psychiatry behind our backs. Put yourself in my shoes, Matthew, having to deal with complaints from the other nurses. Nurse Linda is my girlfriend. Everyone in the hospital knows about our relationship, so any grievances people can't tell me directly all get funneled to her. I'm really sorry, I'll be more careful, I say, lowering my head as if praying to Linda. Linda laughs softly and lightly strokes my head. I met her at this hospital. From the first time I met her, her brightness with a touch of shadow somewhere intrigued me. I just couldn't help but be drawn to her. I was the one who asked her out, and the one who wooed her. It took 2 whole months from our first date to the start of our relationship because it was Linda's first time. She's like the sun in this ward, radiating positivity. So patients and colleagues adore her. It seems the outpatient services have begun, and the presence of people bustling in the hallways has become more noticeable. It's going to be a busy day again. I checked the time on my wristwatch and called out to the corridor, "Come on in." This is the signal for today's battle to begin. Somehow, I managed to smoothly handle the counseling sessions, and so far, the nurses hadn't gotten angry with me for running late. At lunch, I breathed a sigh of relief. In the break room, I ate the lunch that Linda prepared for me. The daily highlight is this homemade lunch. Just as I'm settling down to enjoy it, William walks in. He was biting into a sweet bun while holding another pastry in his hand. "Eat something proper, that's not nutritious at all," I said. I think the phrase "an unhealthy doctor" was invented for William. "I don't have time to fuss over making a packed lunch like you," he replies. Pulling the metal chair back roughly, William let out a big sigh as he sat down. Something must have gone wrong in his morning consultations. Something happened. In response to my inquiry, William slowly chewed his bread, seemingly lost in thought. He's probably deciding whether to tell me or not. "If it's about a patient, I'd like you to share the information." I pushed him a bit since he seemed hesitant, and William finally opened his mouth. "A patient with a referral letter from a university professor is coming. Apparently has aphonia, but I don't know the cause." It seems to be a patient requested by William's mentor. Which means failure is not an option. Aphonia is a conversion disorder where the voice is lost due to emotional stress or mental trauma. It's one symptom of a mental illness. Psychological therapy, medication, counseling, and various approaches are necessary. Of course, voice training will probably be involved as well. The professor specifically named you. Why? Have any connections with the university? I see. So that's what he wanted to know. I don't know, maybe it's a referral from someone. There aren't many psychological counselors out here. I explained to him that I don't know the professor and have no connections with the university. He still looked unconvinced, but a nurse came to call William, and our conversation ended. As the afternoon consultations began, so did my counseling. I realized that a new appointment had been squeezed into what should have been my break time. Probably, this was the patient William was talking about. Age 18, name Caitlin Miller. Recently, she lost her family in a traffic accident. The symptoms of aphonia appeared right after that. She was also in the car at the time of the accident. A survivor of the accident, that is. The mental stress from the shock of the accident must be the cause. William's examination was over, and the young woman who sat before me, Caitlin, looked more mature than her age. Her neatly trimmed bands seemed to express a strong will. "I'm your psychological counselor, Matthew Johnson. I'll be asking you a few questions. Just point to one of these cards, will you?" I placed 3 cards in front of her labeled yes, no, and neither, and began asking questions. She calmly answered my inquiries without any hesitation, all throughout. She didn't seem to be in any doubt. Sometimes, I can quickly understand a patient during our first counseling session, but it seemed like my relationship with this young woman was going to take longer. Caitlin came in for counseling once a week. She always arrived promptly. During our 3rd counseling session, I was taken aback when I saw the number of medications prescribed by William. Psychiatric drug therapy tends to involve a lot of medication. I've always thought that it puts a significant burden on the patient. I believe William prescribed these to help her rest her body and mind, but this won't work. It's like sweeping the problem under the rug. I decided to talk to William about it. "William, don't you think this prescription is a bit much? It might be hard on her body." William cut me off and stood up from his chair, confronting me. He seemed to be in a bad mood. "Don't challenge a medical doctor with your counseling credentials. Just do as I've instructed." Few people know it, but William is a highly responsible person. He's too much of a perfectionist. Caitlin's treatment isn't progressing as he'd hoped, and he's getting frustrated. "Stop taking your anger out on me. She doesn't have insomnia, and her mood isn't fluctuating. She doesn't need these." I showed him the results of the psychological tests and explained. "I really think what she needs is someone to understand her. I'm frustrated by my own limitations, and I still haven't fully grasped her inner world. Look, Matthew, you're fine with your laid-back approach. I'm different. This patient was referred by my college mentor. I have to meet his expectations quickly. Do you understand this pressure?" He slammed his cup down on the desk, unable to conceal his anger and impatience. I don't understand the weight that he carries. But I thought that our desire to heal her was the same. He glared at me, and with that, William left the room. Linda, who came into the room in exchange, saw the cup that had been knocked over and had a surprised look on her face. "What's the matter, Dr. Smith again?" Occasionally, William and I clash. The nurses are used to it. It's about Caitlin Miller's treatment. I think William is rushing too much. I think we should take a more compassionate approach. As soon as I mentioned Caitlin Miller's name, Linda's cheerful face clouded over. She began to wipe the table somewhat roughly. There was a vibe that she had something to say to me. "Linda, what's the matter?" I gently spoke, touching Linda's arm, only to be brushed away with strong force. This had never happened before. Linda seemed surprised at her strength as well and softly apologized to me, saying sorry. "I don't want to say this, but..." Prefacing her statement that way, Linda expressed her dissatisfaction to me. She seemed worried that I was becoming too engrossed in Caitlin Miller's treatment. Though trust hasn't been fully established yet, I could feel that Caitlin was interested in me. She would show up at the hospital even on non-counseling days, and she'd borrow books from my shelf. Our counseling sessions always run over time. Recently, even when I'm with Linda, Caitlin often becomes the topic of conversation. "I've got a lot bottled up inside because of her," Linda said, coming closer to me. "Lately, we haven't been spending much time together, just the two of us." I certainly understand what Linda wants to say. "What? Here?" I couldn't take my eyes off Linda as she approached. She sat down next to me, bringing her face closer. "I've got a lot bottled up inside. Complaints. I'll explode if I don't vent. You're going to listen today. Don't run away," she declared, pointing at me. I'd been neglecting to care for the most important person. I might really be unqualified as a counselor. That evening, Linda's complaints were heard in my room, and an apologetic meeting was held, with me bowing my head over and over. Linda made me drink like crazy, and I was hungover the next day. Fortunately, I had no appointments in the morning. I slowly drank my coffee while checking Caitlin Miller's psychological test results. I thought I might be overlooking something significant. If the initial approach is wrong, no progress will be made. Suddenly, as I looked at the psychological test results, the words that William said yesterday crossed my mind. My intuition started to buzz, telling me, this is it. I checked her family structure, her parents' and siblings' history, and the position she was in. The misunderstanding had been there from the very beginning. I trusted that intuition, and during the counseling, I asked her, "The loss of your voice wasn't because of that unfortunate accident, was it?" At my words, she opened her eyes wide. And then she nodded vigorously. "You don't play the piano anymore." Looking at her neatly extended fingertips, done with gel nails, I asked her. Then she tightly clenched her fingertips and nodded. Caitlin had been called a piano prodigy since she was 3 years old. Her name is listed in competitions. She had started walking down the path of a musician at a young age. But at some point, her presence had vanished. Whether it was due to the typical adolescent mind, or she felt her limits, that is something only she knows. She could no longer play the piano like before. Caitlin, who had been raised with high expectations, may have been playing the piano just to meet the expectations of adults. And Caitlin's heart was broken. Around the same time, it was decided that her brother would study abroad as a special soccer student. Probably, that was when she developed mutism. Your parents hid the fact that you lost your voice from those around them, didn't they? At my question, she nods. She had been absent from school for over 6 months. And this was the evidence that her parents tried to hide the fact that she had become mute. Her parents were said to be perfectionists. Suddenly, Caitlin stands up and headed to the whiteboard. And with a flowing motion, she runs her pen across it. Being unable to speak is shameful. Having a child with a disability is embarrassing. Written neatly on the whiteboard, these were probably words thrown at Caitlin by her parents. I thought that I had no value if I couldn't play the piano, and that I shouldn't exist. She wrote this and turned towards me, smiling with a grin. Caitlin's smile looked as if she was crying. That's not true at all. It'll be okay. Let's get your voice back together. I'm here for you. At my words, Caitlin tried to respond by opening her mouth. Her voice still didn't come out, but I could hear the breath escaping her throat. With vocal training, she can regain her voice. First, I thought it was important to make her feel like talking again, to take care of her heart. That evening, it seems that William got wind of Caitlin trying to speak herself. With a joyful face, he fussily hugged me and started thumping my chest. Ouch. I feel like I understand why the professor picked you. I respect your skills as a psychological counselor, and from now on, I won't make fun of you for not having a medical license. William said this, laughing. The professor spilled the beans. At my words, he grinned mischievously. It seems he heard from the professor that I had a medical license. I had hidden my medical license because I wanted to focus on my work as a psychological counselor. Now you can work even harder, Matthew. I'm counting on you. True to his words, William stopped ridiculing me as he used to. He started consulting me about the treatment plan and began to listen to the psychological test results and process. Lately, there are even rumors among the patients that William has become kinder. In the midst of all this, Caitlin's treatment for mutism was gradually progressing. I was doing my best to accompany her in voice exercises and was always there to talk through her concerns. I have become almost like a brother to her. She had lost her parents and younger brother and must have felt lonely. She seems to think of me as a brother too. While Caitlin and I were communicating by writing in the counseling room, there was a knock and Linda came in. She frowned at the whiteboard filled with our conversation. Doctor, you're running way over time. Caitlin isn't your only patient. And Caitlin, don't monopolize Dr. Johnson all to yourself. It was clear that Linda was taking her frustrations out on us. She said it with a laugh, but her eyes weren't smiling. Moreover, she turned to Caitlin, who was slightly bowing her head, and said something unbelievable in a barely audible voice. What's wrong with your great parents? Isn't this a bit excessive? Besides, I think that was a slip of the tongue. But it was something she should have never said. Linda, stop. I quickly cut her off. I hoped Caitlin hadn't heard, but the look on Caitlin's face when she looked up was very stern. She had clearly heard Linda's words. And she glared at Linda, trying to make a sound. But all that came from her throat was a soft wheezing sound. Caitlin tapped the whiteboard in frustration. To calm herself down, she took a deep breath and slowly opened her mouth. Great parents aren't always the best parents. It was a terribly raspy, broken voice, but it was the first time Caitlin had spoken in front of us. She still couldn't speak for long, so she scribbled on the whiteboard and slapped it as if to say, "Read this." I wasn't loved. My parents only loved my talent. I was alone. Caitlin's eyes, as she glared at Linda, were deadly serious. This must be the truth. Noticing Caitlin's intense gaze, Linda snapped back to reality and whispered a small "I'm sorry." Caitlin, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have imposed my own opinions on you. You see, my mother was a bit mentally ill. She was a very vague person, and sometimes she understood me, but other times she didn't. Linda said she hated her mother. She lamented her circumstances while caring for her ailing mother, wondering why she had to suffer this fate. Children can't choose their parents, can they? With those words, Linda began to shed tears. Caitlin looked at Linda, her face expressionless. But you've grown up to be a fine adult. I believe that's proof that your mom loved you. Caitlin wrote largely on the whiteboard. Reading those words, Linda broke down crying. You're right, that's true. Mom was trying so hard to love me, fighting her illness, and trying so hard. At this moment, Linda recalled a family outing that her mother had attended just once. She remembered how her mother had gone to the hospital several days before, trying to hold herself together just for that one day, and how she had prepared a packed lunch for Linda early in the morning. Linda couldn't stop the tears as she remembered. Besides, you have Dr. Johnson by your side. With a raspy, small voice, Caitlin's expression was very gentle as she told Linda this. Linda wiped her tears and smiled back at her. Thank you, Caitlin. I remembered something important. Linda responded, and Caitlin nodded contentedly. Caitlin's treatment continued to progress smoothly, and she soon forgot she had ever suffered from selective mutism. Today was the last day of counseling. William was also there to see her off at the entrance. It seemed he couldn't poorly treat a patient who was sent from a university professor. At the entrance, Caitlin bowed. And then she looked up at me, smiling mischievously. What? I asked, sensing she had something to say. Dr. Smith, Dr. Johnson, thank you so much for everything. And Miss Thompson, thank you too, Caitlin began, her words filled with gratitude. William scratched his head, looking a little embarrassed. Dr. Johnson, please be sure to invite me to your wedding with Miss Thompson. Let me play the piano, she continued. At this, Linda and I exchanged glances, both of us more embarrassed than anything else. Caitlin's face was beaming with joy. Linda looked down, seeming embarrassed. Then, next to her, William exclaimed in astonishment. What? Wait, you two are in that kind of relationship, huh? We were all surprised at his words. The fact that we were dating was well known within the hospital. We were astonished by William's obliviousness to this fact. Dr. Smith, you'd better fix your cluelessness, or you'll never find a wife. See you later. With these sharp words, Caitlin smiled sweetly. William, his shoulders slumped in disappointment, weakly waved to Caitlin. I casually took Linda's hand. People are all different, and it's those differences that make it interesting. And if we lack something, we can always make it up for each other. What should I say in my proposal? Looking at Linda's blushing face, I pledged in my heart to take good care of her.